Thank you, everybody. I'm going to start with a story. In 1933, a reporter with Fortune magazine felt he had discovered something unusual in American life during a trip to North Carolina. Visiting the town of Kannapolis, founded 2 decades earlier by the Cannon Company, and slowly expanded, the reporter found it to be, quote, like a medieval city, standing aloof and self-contained in the midst of empty country, suspicious of strangers and loyal to its feudal lords. Kannapolis, he reported, was the biggest unincorporated town in America with some 15,000 inhabitants. And, quote, every foot of it is owned by the mills, he wrote. The town consisted of hundreds of tidy, white-clapboard millworker houses, 7 huge textile factories, the company-funded Cabarrus Memorial Hospital, a company commissary, the Cannon Memorial YMCA, the Daily Independent owned by the Cannon family. Although the police were on the county payroll, all other functions normally associated with government were under Cannon's purview: firefighting, street maintenance, trash collection, schools, and utilities. Atop the company's Mill Number 1, a huge illuminated sign proclaimed the town's sole purpose in life: the largest manufacturer of towels in the world, it read. Charles Cannon, described by Fortune magazine reporter as the foremost figure in the U.S. textile industry and as a round-faced, ruddy, and nervous executive, was head of the company and virtual lord of the town from the 1920s until his death in 1971. Such was his power locally that in 1969 the Wall Street Journal likened him to Monaco's Prince Rainier. Now, having spent several years as a journalist, I can tell you that every reporter wants to say that he's discovered something unusual, something unique. But was Kannapolis truly that unusual? In fact, there were dozens of mill towns across the southern Piedmont, from North Carolina to Georgia, home to many modern mills sporting the latest equipment and competing in international markets. Most of these communities were smaller than Kannapolis, but some of the more prominent ones included Roanoke Rapids, Burlington, and Gastonia, North Carolina, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and Columbus, Georgia. The model for these towns, said writer W.J. Cash in his seminal 1941 work, The Mind of the South, was a traditional one. The settlements were, quote, essentially indistinguishable in organization from the familiar plantation of the cotton fields, he wrote. Now, these towns continued to have textile production well into the 1980s, I should say, although textiles are now sort of a thing of the past in America, having almost all migrated abroad. It was an industry that continued well into the lifetimes of most people here. Cash, too, exaggerated the uniqueness, however, of the Piedmont cotton mill towns and their purely southern origins. Coal mining towns from Ohio to Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Colorado shared many similar attributes, all housing owned by the mine-owning companies, all law enforcement and government, any healthcare facilities or recreational facilities owned and controlled by the companies. Included were towns like Erie and Nantiglow, Pennsylvania, Jenkins, Harlan, and Wheelwright, Kentucky, and Logan, West Virginia. Many coal and copper mining towns went Kannapolis one better, and these workers were required as a condition of employment to live in the company-owned housing, and often required to shop at the company store. They were often paid in company issue money or scrip, which was redeemable primarily at the company store. Even benign company towns, and here I'm thinking of places like Hershey, Pennsylvania, or early Pullman, Illinois, or the Penn Neat timber town of Scotia, California, shared some of these attributes. In Hershey, however, town dwellers enjoyed ideal housing with indoor plumbing, which was a rarity in the southern mill towns and mining towns, electricity, central heating, and landscaped yards. Pullman, now an area in within the Chicago city limits, but then on the city's outskirts, was erected in the late 19th century by the Pullman Palace Car Company, which made those sleeping cars that were on trains, sort of luxurious sleeping cars on railroad trains. In addition to the production facilities, that town consisted of many streets of 5-family row houses and several large tenements, all featuring natural gas, indoor plumbing, and running water. At the center of the town was a spectacular arcade building featuring shops, a 1,000-seat theater, and a 6,000-volume lending library. There were also schools, parks, and playing fields. Moreover, there were even similarities in towns that were not built by companies, but which became primarily associated with one enterprise as that company grew in wealth and importance. Austin, Minnesota, for example, hometown of Hormel Foods, and Corning, New York, home of glassmaker Corning, Inc., both became primarily known as the domiciles of those corporations. Hormel has neither owned any company housing nor any hospitals, newspapers, or television stations, but it might as well have. It's exercised dominion over decisions made by these institutions, as well as what's gotten taught in the schools, preached in the churches, and what laws have been enforced. You'll notice that I've switched to the present tense. I'm now really talking about a situation that continues in that town. The more benign Corning Incorporated has spent millions maintaining its upstate hometown, endowing the local community college and library, funding recreation facilities, residential building, and the impressive Corning Museum of Glass, and overseeing renewal of the downtown area, in particular following a devastating 1972 flood. Well, it's high time I address the issue of definition directly. I wanted to start off with these kinds of stories, but many people will say, well, just what is a company town? The term tends to be bandied about very loosely, and when I started writing this, I imagined there would be purists who would say, company towns really, that you're really only talking about places like Kannapolis, where everything is owned by the company. But what I found actually is that many people who I've spoken to, including interviewers on various public radio shows, always want to expand the definition. I was on a podcast with Louis Lapham recently, a Bloomberg podcast, and Lapham wanted to talk about the National Security Administration facilities in Northern Virginia, and was that a company town? It's this big complex where millions, well, thousands of people work apparently. And so oftentimes people are ready to widen the definition. For my part, I don't think of a company town simply as a point of industrial concentration. I'm really talking about towns that are dominated by a single employer in a single industry, much as textile enterprises owned by a single group of capitalists dominated the economic, cultural, and political life of Lowell, Massachusetts, or United States Steel dominated the town it built, Gary, Indiana, and so on. Now, some people think of Washington, D.C. or Detroit, Michigan as company towns, but both of these really are large metropolitan areas with multiple employers and so do not qualify in my mind. The Los Angeles Times has contributed to this definitional confusion. It has a blog called Company Town that's really about Hollywood. It's about the entertainment industries in Hollywood. Again, I don't think Hollywood really qualifies. It's a part of the Los Angeles sprawl, and really as much of that town is devoted to entertainment, I think Hollywood is not a company town. The Wall Street Journal, which reviewed my book recently, faulted my book for not including Washington, but that really goes to another issue: the tendency to use the term company town as a pejorative. The Journal dislikes the federal government, therefore they wanted to call Washington, D.C. a company town because they thought that would be a negative way of talking about the federal government. But I'm not using the term as a slur. I'm not referring to company towns as only negative places. As you can tell from the subtitle of my book, I have a number of places that are more ideal towns that are referred to. And there are, of course, ambiguous cases, some of them quite contemporary. When I first discussed the idea of doing this book with my agent, he began telling me about a story he'd just read in the New York Times. And here is that story. It's called Hiding in Plain Sight by John Markoff and Saul Hansel, The Dalles, Oregon, June 8th. This is from 2006. On the banks of the windswept Columbia River, Google is working on a secret weapon in its quest to dominate the next generation of internet computing.